Hello, friends, and welcome back to Heartscapes, where we are practicing the system of Reiki at the intersection of self-reflection, spiritual practice, and social action. My name is Michaela, and I'm so glad to have you back with me today. A week or so ago, I shared a video talking about the importance of understanding how a practice like the system of Reiki, or whatever our spiritual practice is, understanding how that practice operates in our day-to-day life, and to doing our best to integrate that practice into the day-to-day joys and challenges and decisions that come up, rather than isolating that practice and considering it something that we only do separate from our day-to-day life. And that was the beginning of a series of videos exploring this concept, exploring how we can best integrate Reiki as a specific system of practice into our day-to-day life. And today we're going to talk about how to do that around a specific realm of life that can sometimes be challenging to talk about, can sometimes be challenging to confront inside of ourselves. And that's the realm of grief, of loss, of death, and the question of what does it mean to grieve well? What does it mean to allow ourselves to experience the sensations of grief, the process of grief, in a way that is ultimately nourishing and grounding, and in a way that, you know, makes us feel more connected to life rather than in ways that make us feel disconnected from life. And what we've been finding through a series of conversations that I've had the absolute joy to be a part of over the last almost year is that the system of Reiki can help us to grieve well in some very amazing and specific ways. And so I wanted for today's video to invite on some of the folks that I've been having this conversation with. It's a group of colleagues, other Reiki practitioners and teachers who all felt this mutual desire to have this conversation and to allow ourselves to be vulnerable and to be honest around what it means to grieve and what our experiences with Reiki have impacted, how that has impacted our personal experience with grief. And beyond that, what it might mean for us as a community to open up more about the topic and to draw on our Reiki practice to do that. And so I want to invite this group of friends to come on with me. And I'm just going to invite you to introduce yourselves, and then we'll just go through some of the questions that we've been sitting with in this conversation and see where it takes us. Nancy, do you want to get us started?
Sure. Thank you, Michaela. I'm Nancy Rudman, and I'm living now in Bainbridge Island in Washington State.
Thank you. Judy, you are next to Nancy on my screen, so I'll invite you to go next.
Hello, everyone. My name is Judy Bosquin, and I am from Stoneham, Massachusetts.
And Martha, you are next on my screen, so I'll invite you in.
Hi, I'm Martha Shear, and I am in Iowa.
Welcome. And Kelly.
Hi, I'm Kelly McDermott Burns of Heartsong Reiki in Central Vermont.
Thank you.
Good morning and afternoon and evening, wherever you are. I'm Joe G. in Sacramento, California, USA. Not too far from the Heartscapes Reiki studio where Michaela is in Davis, California.
Yep, and Joe is my co-teacher on all things Reiki. And so the six of us, along with a few other colleagues, have been in this conversation for, gosh, almost a year now. And Nancy, you were the one who really called this topic forward and invited this conversation. And it's been really nourishing to me to continue being with you in this circle. And so I wanted to just open it up and invite those of you who wish to share, just as a starting point, what does it mean to you to grieve well? And perhaps one or two things about how your personal practice with the system of Reiki has influenced your ability to grieve well, or your understanding of what that means. Just invite any of you who wishes to take that thread.
I'll start. I love that we're having conversation around this topic because I've been in this, in this topic for a number of years now, and in many ways. And one thing that's really clear is that we are such a, death phobic society, and everyone, people are fearful of confronting it, or, feel vulnerable. There are many reasons why people don't want to face it. So I think the grieving well is so important, because in my vision of what grieving well is, and it could be around a death, it could be just anything in life that we've lost, a dream, a partnership. It's the ability to follow your own journey with it, and have a safe place or a safe person that you can be who you need to be. You can show your emotions, you can talk with someone openly, that you're not trying to conform to what a lot of people feel. There's a schedule, that you're supposed to be doing this now, you're supposed to be better, you're supposed to be over this, that everyone is different. Everyone's journey is different with grief. And grieving well to me is allowing for each person to do what they have to do and go through what they have to go through. And Reiki, the Reiki practice for me is what allows us to support other people in that, by holding space for them, by listening to them, by compassionate listening. So our own practice strengthens us to be able to do it for others, and of course for ourselves too. I mean, we're the ones going through it. It's always good to have other people supporting us too. But my practice, my personal practice, supports me in supporting others, and just being able to hold space for myself and for others, and to listen, just listen and validate, and be a sacred witness for others on their path, and let them know that they're not doing anything wrong. They're doing what they need for themselves in a healthy way. And it hurts a lot. There's no way around it. So thank you.
Nancy, you have said so many true things that were in my heart as well, that I was thinking about grieving well. And the only thing that I would add from my perspective is that within that allowing, within that journey, in the trust that you have in the community, whether it's your family community, friendship community, whoever you're sharing your journey with, is to find and practice a ritual that would help you to process the grief, process your experiences with the person or the animal who has died, or if you're grieving a loss, if you're grieving something else, that a dream, like you said, having the space to pay attention and go within. And of course, Reiki and Reiki practice gives us that permission to pause and go within and take the time. So a ritual can sometimes help us in human form with the processing, with going through some steps that help us to share what's going on with us, but also bring a definition to it. I don't know if that's the right word, but because part of grief can be confusing, and it can be not that we're going to necessarily find clarity. It's not going to be the same thing for everyone, but helping little by little with the process of a ritual. And it could be something that's done once, it could be something that's done repeatedly. It doesn't have to be a one and done thing, to help us with that process.
Yeah, and Judy, that's something that this space has kind of evolved into for us. We've been able to use this space to conduct ritual for and with each other around grieving as it feels necessary. And so cultivating community being such an important piece of that. Yeah. What does it mean to grieve well for others of you?
I want to take that thread. Something I want to add through this was this addition of community, of a Reiki community, but this spiritual community that that we're exploring grief in. And I realized for me from a very young age, just feeling that, having to conform, not being allowed. And with Reiki as a self practice, but also a practice within community, there's a kind of a sense of, I would say, of coming home, of finding, not just my place to grieve, but that safe container, that trusting space that I'm part of something bigger. I'm part of a collective where we have that interdependence of leaning in and supporting and being supported and doing the supporting while being allowed, while being able to do what we as individuals need to do on the journey of grieving, whether it's a personal grief, a personal experience, or a larger cultural world collective grieving that we do. So yeah, the sense of community connection, but that spiritual aspect that Reiki brings to it, and finding my tribe, finding my people or culture that can talk about this and create the container.
One of the things I really love hearing is that word allow. I think that is so important in this process. And grieving well, I mean, I have experience with not grieving well, and I know how dangerous that is. And not being able to process serious loss in my life, and that just I just carried it. And so, for me, having the practice of Reiki to support others, but also for myself, I've been able to work with people who are at the end of life. And so that informs me for, when I'm around my loved ones, when they're at the end of their life, but also, being able to hold that space, not only for somebody else, but for myself without judgment, and recognizing that, like Nancy said, we all go at our own pace. And, this culture is just so in a hurry, right? Get through everything, just push it aside and, keep going forward. You got to get it all done. And how dangerous that is. And really not having the opportunity. Grief is messy. We're not just like in a linear state. We're back and forth. We're advancing, we're feeling better, and then we're just knocked on our knees, So, so I think it's an incredibly important conversation that, as both, as everybody's been saying, we just don't have enough of it in our culture, and in the support that goes with that, or the correct support, where, we have people who were meaning well, who are saying, oh, it's okay, you're going to be fine, just keep going forward, or they don't want to talk about the person who's gone, and that sort of thing. So being able to really share your loss without feeling judged, or worrying if people are going to be tired of hearing you, or things like that. If we can hold a space for somebody in a non-judgmental way, and not, have any kind of agenda with them, but letting them just be in that grief the way they need to be in the grief. And it's different for everyone. And the other word that I come up to a lot is witnessing. And we talked about this a little, about how animals will witness with another animal, and how also important that is, not having to do anything, but just be with that person who's passing, or that person who's grieving the loss of someone, and just holding that space without comment, and full of compassion. So that's where Reiki practice for me comes in, and that, developing that compassion, developing that ability to hold the space without having any need to fix anything.
Yeah, that's so important. Joe, what comes up for you when you think about what it means to grieve well and how Reiki has supported you in that?
I'm thinking about, well, so many conversations we've had since we gathered together our first one. Of all things related to grief and death, joy, and some work that some of us got to do together around the Dalai Lama and the Archbishop Desmond Tutu and the Book of Joy. And some of those obstacles to joy and pillars of joy and practices for joy that came out of some of that work that related to our conversations. And so what really pulled together in all of that was this sense that death is this aspect of life, life and death. And I realize that we have, particularly in a Western culture, in our education system and our institutions, that we have this sort of dualistic, binary, polarized, judged way of saying something is good and something that's opposite is bad. And this is right and that's wrong. And I like this and I don't like or I hate that. And softening attachment to that has been part of the process of my own understanding about grieving well. That grief, death, and life are all well. So what does that mean in some very practical terms in any given day when emotions are there? I'm having emotions and maybe those emotions are having me. And maybe I'm even thinking those emotions are bad and I'm judging them because they're having me. That why can't a good emotion have me? And where then is grief good and well? So those are some of the things that happen in my heart and mind during this process. And it seemed that, because we in this particular group of in the conversation practice Reiki and teach Reiki, a number of us, that it was easy in a way to have a spiritual practice to go to. And I'm not saying that Reiki is the only spiritual practice, of course, I've had others, but any spiritual practice that gives us some opportunity for some self-reflection, introspection. What's happening inside? What's happening around me? And how do they relate? How maybe are they one and interconnected? Yeah. So I think that spiritual practice, particularly the simple, even if it's not easy, practice of Reiki or anything else really gives us something to be in a regular, maybe supported process of considering what's going on inside me and what do I want? What maybe feels like it's missing? What do I need? Like joy or contentment or being contented in the midst of this, or peace, and how spiritual practices, support more joy and more contentedness and more peace. So I maybe just like to just leave it with that for now.
Yeah, Joe, you're speaking to like some of the places of bridging, I think, between what others have shared. And like Kelly, I love that you named that you've experienced not grieving well. I can definitely relate to that, right? And it's like sometimes almost easier to think about, well, what does that mean, before we circle around to what it means to grieve well. And Nancy, what you mentioned off the bat, that our culture is such a death-fearing and death-avoidant culture, and death of any kind, both the physical death and also the endings of any number of things that we could call a loss that's worthy of grieving. And inherent in that is a widespread discomfort or inability to be with discomfort that many of us experience around this. And we talked about this a little bit around, trying to be with other people who are grieving and how uncomfortable it can feel to just hold space, just to allow them to be in that pain without trying to fix it, without trying to shut it down, because we're uncomfortable with it. And, that for me became such an important marker of what it means to grieve well, and what it the benefit that my Reiki practice has had on that is in giving myself a greater and greater capacity to be with the discomfort of it, both my own grief and the grief of others. And that, when we practice the system of Reiki, particularly from the perspective of its Japanese origins, where we get to work so much with the concept of non-duality, so much with the concept of interconnection, the way that we're on the one hand, totally connected with each other. We can really feel each other. We can hold space for each other that is unique. On the other hand, that we're invited to let go of this sensation of things being, as Joe was saying, dualistic. It's either good or it's bad. And the way that prevents us, it blocks us from feeling the complexity of something like grief. And that when we make ourselves bigger, when we're in this practice that allows us to feel like there's more room inside of us for all of the complicated things we're feeling, then we can feel the joy alongside grief. We can laugh alongside crying. And that ability to make room for all of those feelings that are complex and sometimes conflicting is a significant part of what it means to me now to grieve well. And that, having a practice like Reiki that, when looked at from a certain perspective is inherently a self practice, that it is about self-reflection, it's about self-development, it's about making more space inside of ourselves so that we can be more fully ourselves and therefore be with others in a way that allows them to be more fully themselves. That we make so much space, so much of a remedy to this grief avoidant culture that we find ourselves in, and that is so detrimental to us. So I love the way that so much of what each of you has said really speaks to that.
Could I just speak to something Joe said? Joe, I love the way you put that. You were looking, you'd like to find, when you're in that, try to find the well side of grief. And it reminded me of the conversation about grief and praise are one and the same. And if you can look at grief from that perspective, that the praise is, that's the love. If you didn't care so much for somebody or something, and if it didn't mean so much to you, and if it wasn't, the joy hadn't been there, then you wouldn't feel the same grief. I mean, so the grief is showing you how much you loved someone or something and how much it meant to you. So you're actually praising that being, for what they were and what they brought to life. So I just wanted to add that. Thank you.
So when we think about, the impact that this conversation and considering these things, being in practice together over these past 9 months has meant to us, and thinking about what this conversation can mean to others, I'm curious what you would want to offer to others as advice, as a gift, as a tool. We've heard a little bit about that already. Ritual as a gift, as a tool. Self-reflection as a gift, as a tool. I wonder if there are others that are in the room, other gifts that we might offer to others as they consider what it might mean to them to grieve well, and to perhaps do that with the support of a system like Reiki.
I think one of the gifts of loss and grief is that it does encourage us to pause. We may be on that treadmill of life, that busyness of life, and then something like this happens that really brings us into the present moment. And being in that moment and being able to feel the feelings, or allowing the space, as you say, space for feeling and breathing. And within that space, I would like to offer listening, which was brought up earlier. I love to hear about stories of people who have passed, or stories of why your dream is lost, or stories of your relationship with your pet, or whatever brings you to that place in the moment of honoring, acknowledging and honoring whatever it was who has passed, or whatever has passed.
I think I would add too, this is what I've done, is really kind of thought about who I felt could hold that space for me when the time comes, because it's going to come sooner or later for losing somebody, or even being at the end of my own life. But knowing, I think for me, knowing that I have 2 or 3 people I can really count on to hold that space without judgment, and with unconditional positive regard, I believe that that gives me comfort. And so I think before we even get to the point where we need help with grief, it's important for us to kind of prepare in a way. And it seems a little morbid, I think, for a lot of people to think that way. But, for me, I know, I'm getting older, my family's getting older. And so being able to have people I know I can call, and I know I can get that non-judgmental holding of space. And they don't necessarily have to be Reiki people. There are plenty of people out there that can do that without having a Reiki practice. But that's, for me, that's an important piece of aging. And even if you're not aging, I think it's still important to know who you can count on when the time comes, and also know that how you can hold that space, just understanding what that even means. And I think listening, as Judy was saying, is really, really important. And so often when somebody's passed, nobody wants to talk about the person with their grieving loved ones because they don't want to make them sadder. But really, it gives them a gift of being able to share what they loved about that person, and in a way keep them alive, and at least in their heart, and they not forgotten. Because a lot of times, once everybody's gone home, and all the dishes are cleared up and all the meals are eaten, then the person who's lost a loved one is just alone. And so being able to follow up with people as well, and again, not necessarily just as Nancy was saying and Judy were saying, not just with somebody who's dying, but there are other ways that we experience grief, and being able to sit with somebody in all of those ways and hold that space.
Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah, thank you, Kelly, for that, because that was what I was thinking too. I was going to say, know ahead of time, know your safe people, your safe person, know the where you can go to have that support and trust. And so that, I think that's a really important one. Thank you. And the other thing I guess I would add is, at the point where someone starts being supported in whatever way and developing, talking about rituals, maybe just the person who's supporting them can just suggest, let them take the lead, but what would make you feel more comfortable? What would you like to explore? Offer some suggestions, but to develop their own little ritual or their own ceremony or something they can do for themselves, but to let them make sure they're playing an active role in it and developing something for themselves that's going to give them comfort. Because I think I found that if the person can take ownership or just have something they can do, that makes a big difference. So thank you.
Well, I think everybody said such amazing things, and things that are in my heart as well. And I think for me, it's this idea, and what we're all talking about is forming community or connection, whether it's one other person or whether it's a group. And that idea, I think, in our culture is about this, like I'm in it alone. And anything we can do, whether it's that holding of that kind of safe space for that person, even if there's no conversation, there's no stories, that just being present with that person, that witnessing. And I think that's really the feels to me like the biggest message is, as we go through these griefs, we are not alone. We are all in this, and we will all experience this in some way many times throughout our life. So I think that, being able to really just be present, and again, coming back to that allowing or witnessing the person or myself to go through that, and just is so important, because there's so few places we have that. We're always trying to fit in and follow some prescribed order of things. So that those two things about the community, about we're not alone, and we each have our own internal wisdom when we're allowed to be witnessed. We each have that. And so I think those are things that we're all saying them in different ways, really.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Yeah, and I think what came up for me in considering, that sense of community, of there being a sense of support, and how my Reiki practice has impacted that. When I think about a gift that I'd like to invite others into, it would be connection with nature. It would be the way in which being in relationship with the natural world can easily support us in that sense of there being support, that sense of there being space, there being a big enough space for all of what we're feeling. The way that standing in a river and feeling the motion of that river can be so soothing to our nervous system when we're activated around grief. The way that leaning against a tree can give us that support. Being with animals, as Kelly mentioned earlier, can feel like companionship. And so as we look to our human networks for support, which is essential, let us also look into the natural world for support. And as we kind of bring this conversation to a close, I just wanted to share back the provisions that have been offered in this conversation for us and for others. I often talk within Heartscapes about being provisioned for this journey of life. What does it mean to be well provisioned, well supported? And in this conversation, we're talking about the provisions of the breath, of taking a pause, of listening deeply to each other, of cultivating a community of support, of preparing ourselves, of not turning away from the inevitability of grief, being prepared for it, of identifying and asking for ritual spaces, of creating rituals for ourselves, either one time or ongoing, either very small or more elaborate, whatever feels supportive in marking the specialness of a moment of grief. Leaning into connection, leaning into our support network, allowing ourselves to be witnessed in the experience of grief, and allow ourselves to be a witness to others without trying to fix them, without trying to change anything for them, but simply witnessing them, and allowing the natural world to hold all of that, to be a big enough container for everything that we're experiencing on a journey of grief. And because it has been so central to these conversations, it's come up a couple of times here, the role of love in grief. And so I want to just leave us with one of my favorite quotes from the Avengers, from the Marvel Avengers universe, spoken by Vision, the character Vision, who said, "What is grief if not love persisting?" And so when we turn away from grief, we're turning away from the love that's in us. And so may we be deeply provisioned to make enough room inside of ourselves, inside of our communities, inside of the conversations that we have and the decisions that we make, to be able to hold love and grief alongside of each other, inside of ourselves and among each other, so that we can grieve well. We can move that feeling through us and let it fortify us and strengthen us rather than diminishing us. I want to thank you all so much for not only coming on today to have this conversation, but being in this conversation so devotedly for the past 9 or 10 months. I look forward to continuing this conversation and to seeing what other pieces want to be shared out with our wider communities. So thank you all so much for being here with me in this conversation on the call. And thank you to those listening and watching. We want to hear from you. What does it mean to you to grieve well? What experiences have you had that can help enrich this conversation? We would love to hear from you. So feel free to drop that in the comments below or to reach out. I'll also put down below in the show notes some resources that we've been compiling around how to support ourselves and each other in this process of grief. So there's been a lot of rich resources that have come out of this conversation. So I'll put those below for those who are interested. And as we continue this conversation and continue this journey, may you be deeply provisioned for it. Thank you so much for watching and listening. I love you all.